In different countries, the tradition of granting a last meal to prisoners before their execution varies, especially based on the country's stance on capital punishment. In the United States, most states follow the practice of offering a special meal a day or two before the execution instead of right before the event. However, there is no guarantee that all meal requests will be granted. Over time, some prisoners have made interesting and peculiar last meal requests. Join us as we explore 50 distinctly weird last meal requests. Number 50. Ronnie Lee Gardner. Gardner was sentenced to death by firing squad, and his execution was carried out on June 18, 2010. Gardner's last meal request was for steak, lobster tail, apple pie, vanilla ice cream, and 7-Up. However, Utah state law at the time did not allow for special last meal requests, and Gardner was served the same meal as other inmates in the prison cafeteria. Number 49. Victor Feguer. Victor Harry Feguer was the last federal inmate put to death in the state of Iowa and was executed by hanging in 1963, aged 28. And for his last meal, he requested the tiniest meal imaginable, a single olive with the pit still in. What a simple guy. Number 48. Aileen Wuornos. Aileen Wuornos was an American serial killer who murdered at least 7 men in Florida between 1989 to 1990. She was found guilty and sentenced to death for 6 of the murders. Wuornos was executed by lethal injection on October 9, 2002. She declined a last meal and asked for a cup of coffee. It seems like she plans not to sleep till death. Number 47. Philip Workman. Philip Workman was a convicted murderer who was executed in Tennessee in 2007. Workman was sentenced to death by lethal injection, and his execution was carried out on May 9, 2007. Workman's last meal request was for a vegetarian pizza to be donated to a homeless person. However, the prison officials denied his request, and he was served a standard meal of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, gravy, green beans, corn, and rolls. Oh, how he was denied a good deed before he goes. Number 46. Adolf Eichmann. Adolf Eichmann was a high-ranking Nazi official who played a key role in organizing the Holocaust, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews during World War II. After the war, Eichmann fled to Argentina, where he lived under a false identity for several years. In 1960, he was captured by Israeli agents and brought to Israel to stand trial for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Eichmann was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. His execution was carried out on May 31, 1962, in Ramla, Israel. The last meal was, in some cases, simply a beverage. Convicted Nazi Adolf Eichmann requested a bottle of Carmel red wine, drinking half of it before his execution. What an exquisite way to live your last moment on Earth. Number 45. Roger Casement. Roger Casement was a British diplomat and Irish nationalist who was executed for treason in 1916. Casement was a key figure in the Irish struggle for independence and was involved in the planning of the Easter Rising, a failed rebellion against British rule in Ireland. Casement's last meal request was a communion wafer. Shortly before his execution, he converted to Catholicism and stated he wanted to go to his death with the body of his God as his last meal. Number 44. Lydell Lee. Lydell Lee was a convicted murderer who was executed in Arkansas in 2017. He was convicted of the 1993 murder of Deborah Reese, a neighbor who he beat to death with a tire thumper. Lee was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Lee's last meal request was for Holy Communion, which was granted to him before his execution. What a heavenly way to save yourself after just so much evil. Number 43. Timothy McVeigh. Timothy McVeigh was a domestic terrorist who was responsible for the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. He was found guilty and sentenced to death by lethal injection. McVeigh requested 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream as his last meal before his lethal injection. Number 42. Robert Dale Conklin. A maintenance man employed at Conklin's apartment complex was gathering aluminum cans from the dumpster when he found dissected human body parts, bloody bedclothes, knives, a screwdriver, rope, a wallet and credit cards, and miscellaneous papers belonging to one George Crooks, all encased in black plastic garbage bags. Conklin admitted to dissecting the body and disposing of incriminating evidence in the dumpster. His last meal consisted of filet mignon wrapped in bacon, deveined shrimp sautéed in garlic butter with lemon, a baked potato with butter, sour cream, chives, real bacon bits, corn on the cob, asparagus with hollandaise sauce, French bread with butter, goat cheese, cantaloupe, apple pie with vanilla tea and ice cream, and an iced tea. What a luxury. Number 41. Thomas J. Grasso. Thomas J. Grasso was a convicted murderer who was executed in Oklahoma in 1995. He was convicted of the 1990 murder of Hilda Johnson, an 87-year-old woman who he strangled with her Christmas tree lights. Grasso was sentenced to death by lethal injection, and his execution was carried out on March 20th, 1995. Grasso's last meal request was for 24 steamed mussels, 24 steamed clams, a double cheeseburger from Burger King, a half-dozen barbecued spare ribs, 2 strawberry milkshakes, 1/2 of a pumpkin pie with whipped cream and diced strawberries, and a 16-ounce can of SpaghettiOs with meatballs. Wow, what a grand exit. Even kings don't get to celebrate their birthdays like this. However, Grasso did not get his last meal request as he was served only spaghetti with meat sauce, a salad with ranch dressing, garlic bread, and a soft drink. What a sad young man. He could have been happy and full at where he was going. Number 40. John Wayne Gacy. The Great Killer Clown was a notorious serial killer who was convicted of the rape and murder of 33 boys and young men in the 1970s. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection, and his execution was carried out on May 10, 1994. Gacy's last meal request was for a bucket of original recipe fried chicken from KFC, a dozen fried shrimp with cocktail sauce, a pound of strawberries, and a bottle of Diet Coke. His request was granted, and he ate his last meal several hours before his execution. Number 39. Stephen Woods. Stephen Woods was a convicted murderer who was executed in Texas in 2011. He was convicted of the 2001 murders of Ronald Whitehead and Bethina Bras, who were both shot and killed during a burglary. Woods was not the shooter, but he was present during the crime and was found guilty of capital murder under Texas law. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection, and his execution was carried out on September 13, 2011. Wood's last meal request was for 2 pounds of bacon, a large 4-meat pizza, 4 fried chicken breasts, 2 drinks each of Mountain Dew, Pepsi, root beer, and sweet tea, 2 pints of ice cream, and a slab of peanut butter fudge with crushed peanuts. However, his request was denied, and he was served a standard meal of chicken and vegetables. 2 strikes, and he's out. No way you don't feel pity for this guy. Number 38. Peter J. Minial. Peter J. Minial was a convicted murderer who was executed in Texas in 2004. He was convicted of the 1988 murder of 25-year-old student Christopher Alumba, who was shot and killed during a robbery. Minial was sentenced to death by lethal injection. What a list! Here is the final meal of a crime legend. 20 beef tacos, 20 beef enchiladas, 2 double cheeseburgers, a pizza with jalapenos, fried chicken, spaghetti with salt, half of a chocolate cake, and half of a vanilla cake, cookies and cream ice cream, caramel pecan fudge ice cream, a small fruit cake, 2 Coca-Colas, 2 Pepsi-Colas, 2 root beers, and 2 orange juices. Darn, he took this death wish personally. Number 37. Ricky Ray Rector. Ricky Ray Rector was a convicted murderer who was executed in Arkansas in 1992. He was convicted of the 1981 murder of police officer Robert Martin, who was shot and killed during a shootout with Rector. Rector was also convicted of the murder of 2 other men, but he was not sentenced to death for those crimes. Rector was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Rector's case gained national attention due to his mental illness and his decision to save a portion of his last meal for later. Rector's last meal request was for a steak, fried chicken, cherry Kool-Aid, and a pecan pie. However, Rector did not eat the pecan pie that was served to him as part of his last meal. Instead, he told the guards that he was saving it for later, and asked them to hold on to it for him. After his execution, the pecan pie was returned to Rector's family. Man acted like he was about to play tag, finish the game, and come back to his food. Number 36. Troy Davis. Troy Davis was a convicted murderer who was executed in Georgia in 2011. He was convicted of the 1989 murder of police officer Mark McPhail. who was shot and killed while working off-duty as a security guard. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection, despite appeals for clemency from various groups, including the Pope and several celebrities. There was a moment Davis decided not to take in any meal. He was going to fast his way to his execution. But as the night came, he decided to break his fast. He stated that this meal wouldn't be his last, which is fairly ominous. Number 35. Steven Anderson. Anderson's last meal consisted of 2 grilled cheese sandwiches with radishes, 1 pint of cottage cheese, a hominy corn mixture, 1 slice of peach pie, and 1 pint of chocolate chip ice cream. Is it just me, or does this guy just love radishes? Number 33. James Edward Smith. James Edward Smith was convicted of the 1984 murder of Larry Rohus, a store clerk who was shot and killed during a robbery. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection, and his execution was carried out on July 24, 1990. Mr. Smith requested a lump of dirt. How surprising. Sadly, the prison denied this request and just gave him a cup of yogurt instead. Hopefully, the yogurt would serve him better than the sand he planned to enjoy. Number 32. Gerald Lee Mitchell. Mitchell was sentenced to death by lethal injection, and his execution was carried out on June 11, 2001. For his last meal, he simply asked for a packet of assorted Jolly Ranchers. Number 31. John Spenkelink. Some people don't care much about food when they're about to place their final order before their execution. Take the case of Spenkelink, who used to drink a lot. He didn't ask for any fancy meal before his execution. Instead, he just requested a single bottle of Jack Daniels, a type of alcohol, and shared it with the prison superintendent. After he was executed, the authorities in Florida decided to change the rules and banned alcohol as part of the last meal. But honestly, going out with a little buzz doesn't sound like such a bad idea to some people. Number 30. Velma Barfield. Velma Barfield was a convicted murderer who was executed in North Carolina in 1984. She was convicted of the 1917-8 murder of Stuart Taylor, her fiancé's mother. Barfield got sentenced to death by lethal injection, and her execution was carried out on November 2, 1984. Barfield's choice for her last meal was cheese doodles and Coca-Cola. Number 29. Robert Alton Harris. Harris was sentenced to death by gas chamber, and his execution was carried out on April 21, 1992. Harris's last meal request was for a 21-piece bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken, 2 large Domino's pizzas, pepperoni and mushroom, a bag of jelly beans, a 6-pack of Pepsi, and a pack of Camel cigarettes. Number 28. Angel Neves Diaz. Angel Neves Diaz was a convicted murderer who was executed in Florida in 2006. He was convicted of the 1979 murder of Joseph Nagy, a strip club manager who was shot and killed during a robbery. He never ordered a last meal but was served a normal prison dish, shredded turkey with taco seasoning, shredded cheese, rice, pinto beans, tortilla shells, apple crisp, and iced tea, which he turned down. Diaz refused to eat that too, and in his last words, he condemned the death penalty as a form of revenge, but also as a cowardly act of humans. Number 27. Oba Chandler. For his final meal, he chose 2 salami sandwiches on white bread with mustard and peanut butter, and also a grape jam sandwich on white bread. To wash it all down, he had iced tea and coffee. With so many sandwiches on white bread, it's safe to say that someone else will have to deal with the crusts left behind. Number 26. H. Holmes. Holmes ate his final meal of boiled eggs, toast, and coffee before being executed at the Moyamensing Prison in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Holmes was executed by hanging but was denied the quick death most hangings deliver. You sure would wonder what he did to deserve such cruelty. Stay till the end to find out. Number 25. Ronald Clark O'Brien. O'Brien had taken out life insurance policies on his children and was attempting to collect on his 8-year-old son, Timothy's policy. O'Brien was sentenced to death by lethal injection, and his execution was carried out on March 31, 1984. O'Brien's last meal request was for a steak, fried chicken, French fries, peas, and a salad with ranch dressing. However, he did not eat any of his last meals and instead chose to take communion with a Catholic priest. Number 24. Odell Barnes, Jr. Odell Barnes, Jr., was a convicted murderer who was executed in Texas in the year 2000. He was convicted of the 1989 murder of Helen Bass, a woman he had abducted, raped, and killed. Barnes was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Barnes's last meal request was for justice, equality, world peace. However, his request was denied, and he was served the same meal as other inmates in the prison cafeteria. Well, isn't that the joke of the century? Number 23, Lawrence Brewer. Lawrence Brewer was sentenced to death by lethal injection, and his execution was carried out on September 21, 2011. Brewer's last meal request was for 2 chicken fried steaks with gravy and sliced onions, a triple patty bacon cheeseburger, a cheese omelet with ground beef, tomatoes, onions, bell peppers, and jalapenos, a bowl of fried okra with ketchup, a pound of barbecued meat with half a loaf of white bread, 3 fajitas, a meat lover's pizza, a pint of Bluebell ice cream, a slab of peanut butter fudge with crushed peanuts, and 3 root beers. He might be trying to feed up a village, maybe. Number 22, Andrew Chan. Andrew, an Australian tourist, attempted to make a quick fortune by smuggling $4 million worth of heroin through airport security. However, Indonesian laws on smuggling are severe, and in Andrew's case, it meant facing the death penalty. Unlike the tradition of granting a last meal to inmates in some places, Indonesian authorities do not provide such a privilege. However, Andrew was granted a unique opportunity to order 2 KFC takeaways before his execution, allowing him to indulge in that scrumptious goodness one last time. Number 21, David Leon Woods. David Leon Woods was a convicted murderer who was executed in Texas in 2018. He was convicted of the 1997 murder of his ex-girlfriend, Ronetta Watson, and her new boyfriend, Marcus Rail. Woods shot both victims multiple times with a .22 caliber rifle. David Woods' last meal was a day before his execution and was given birthday cake and pizza with family. Though many might think it was his birthday, but far from it. He probably wanted to celebrate his transition. On the day of his execution, he was placed on a liquid diet. Number 20. Andrew Lackey. Andrew Lackey was a convicted murderer who was executed in Alabama in 2013. He was convicted of the 2005 murder of Charles Newman, a man he had met at a bar. Lackey beat Newman to death with a lead pipe and then stole his car and other belongings. Lackey's last meal request came from the prison kitchen and included grilled cheese and bologna sandwiches with French fries. His request was granted, and he ate his last meal several hours before his execution. Number 19. Viva LEROY Nash. Viva LEROY Nash is said to be the oldest to be put on death row. Nash was sentenced to death by lethal injection after spending 70 years in prison for killing a police officer. He was already a 94-year-old deaf and blind man when he was executed. For his last meal, he ate popcorn with ketchup hamburger with cinnamon rolls like the buns and hot dog with jam. What a weird combination. Number 18. Marion Albert Pruitt. The next on the list is Marion Albert Pruitt. Marion was a death row inmate who was executed on April 12, 1999 for the murder of several people. He was convicted of killing 6 people, including his wife, stepson, and 4 other people he met while hitchhiking. Or is it hitch-killing, am I right? With that, he was sentenced to death for his crimes. Marion Albert Pruitt's last meal request was one of the most extravagant in history. He requested a large amount of food that could feed a whole town's people. His last meal included a stuffed crust pizza from Pizza Hut, 4 Burger King Whoppers, a large order of French fries, 3 2-liter bottles of Pepsi, a bucket of ice, a bottle of ketchup, salt, fried eggplant, fried squash, fried okra, and a pecan pie. Marion Albert Pruitt's last meal request was so large that it took 2 trays to carry all of the food. His request was considered one of the most shocking and extravagant last meal requests in history. Number 17. Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was a notorious American serial killer who confessed to the murder of at least 30 young women in the 1970s. He was executed on January 24, 1989, in Florida State Prison's electric chair. Bundy's last meal request was a simple one. He declined a special meal and instead was given the traditional last meal of steak, eggs, hash browns, and coffee. Bundy's decision to decline a special meal was seen by some as an attempt to maintain control and deny the authorities the satisfaction of seeing him indulge in a final meal. Bundy's crimes were particularly heinous, and his execution was widely publicized. Witnesses described his execution as being sober and solemn, with no outbursts or disturbances from Bundy. His last meal request, while simple, was a reminder of the finality of his sentence and the end of his life. Number 16. Ajmal Kasab. Ajmal Kasab was a Pakistani militant who was involved in the 2008 Mumbai attacks in India. He was a member of the terrorist group Lashkar-e-Taiba and played a significant role in the coordinated attacks that lasted for 4 days and resulted in the deaths of 166 people. Kasab and his accomplices targeted multiple locations in Mumbai, including the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel, the Oberoi Trident Hotel, the Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminus Railway Station, and a Jewish community center. They carried out shootings, bombings, and took hostages during the attacks. Regarding Kasab's last meal request, he declined one. I mean, who declines free food? Obviously not me. But he's still worthy to be on this list because instead of giving him nothing, the prison just decided to give him a basket of tomatoes. Maybe he hated tomatoes. Who knows? Number 15. Teresa Lewis. Teresa Lewis was a death row inmate who was executed on September 23, 2010, in Virginia for her role in the murder of her husband and stepson. She was the first woman to be executed in Virginia in nearly a century. How sad for the women of Virginia. They were about to beat all-time records high until Teresa showed up. Lewis's last meal request was a simple one. She requested fried chicken, sweet peas with butter, Dr. Pepper, and apple pie for dessert. Her request was seen as a comfort food, and it was reported that she ate very little of it before her execution. Lewis's case was controversial, as she had an IQ of 72 and was considered borderline mentally disabled. Her execution sparked a debate about the use of the death penalty for those with mental disabilities. Number 14. Richard Glossop. Glossop was accused of hiring a man named Justin Sneed to kill Van Trees, but Glossop maintained his innocence and claimed that he had nothing to do with the murder. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection, but his execution has been stayed multiple times due to concerns about the reliability of the evidence used to convict him. He'd exhausted his last appeal and eaten his last meal: fish and chips, a Wendy's Baconator burger, and a strawberry shake. Number 13. Gary Gilmore. Gary Gilmore was sentenced to death by firing squad, and his execution was carried out on January 17, 1977. Gilmore's last meal request was for a hamburger, a hard-boiled egg, a baked potato, a few cups of coffee, and 3 shots of whiskey. However, he did not eat any of his last meals and instead gave his food to another inmate. Number 12. Alfred Bourgeois. Alfred Bourgeois was a psychopath responsible for the death of his own daughter, as he killed her by repeatedly smashing her through the window of his car. Alfred offered no apology or just sought to defend himself. He was sentenced to death via lethal injection. The last actual meal was a plate of red lobster. This dish consisted of mushrooms stuffed with seafood, fried shrimp, shrimp Alfredo pasta, 6 buttery cookies, and a delicious cheesecake. Number 11. Robert Charles Comer. Robert Charles Comer was executed on May 23, 2007, in Arizona for the murder of a man and a woman during a robbery in 1987. Comer's crime involved the brutal murder of 2 individuals, and his execution marked the culmination of a lengthy legal process. His last meal request, with its stark simplicity, stood in stark contrast to the gravity of his crimes. Comer's last meal request was a simple one. Comer was given his last meal of fried okra, buns, butter, salt, and banana bread at the dinner hour, Monday evening. Number 10. Karla Faye Tucker. Another on our list is Karla Faye Tucker, a convicted murderer who was executed in Texas in 1998. She was the first woman to be executed in Texas since the Civil War, and the first woman to be executed in the United States since 1984. Tucker was convicted of the 1983 murders of Jerry Lynn Dean and Deborah Thornton, who were both killed with a pickaxe during a burglary. She had a weird orgasm when committing this deed. I think weird is an understatement. That's just gross. Despite appeals for clemency from various groups, including the Pope and several celebrities, Tucker's sentence was not commuted, and she was executed by lethal injection. Tucker's last meal request was for a banana, a peach, and a garden salad with ranch dressing. Her request was granted, and she ate her last meal several hours before her execution. Number 9. John David Duty. At noon, Duty was granted his last meal request, which included a double cheeseburger with mayonnaise, a foot-long hot dog with cheese, mustard, and onions, a cherry limeade, and a banana shake. He then met with a prison chaplain, his attorneys, and his family. Number 8. Michael LAMBRIX. Michael LAMBRIX's last meal was a traditional Thanksgiving dinner and caramel ice cream, which his mother pledged to prepare if he were released. 17 people, including 5 members of the media, witnessed the execution. Number 7. Joseph Mitchell Parsons. Joseph Parsons was executed in 1999. For his last meal, Parsons asked for Burger King Whoppers, French fries, a chocolate shake, chocolate chip ice cream, and a packet of Grape Hubba Bubba bubble gum. Number 6. Barton K. Kirkham. Barton, a former member of the United States Air Force, faced a discharge in 1955 due to his involvement in a robbery that took place in Colorado while he was away without permission. However, in 1956, his actions took an even darker turn when he was involved in a tragic incident in Salt Lake City, Utah. During an armed robbery at a grocery store, 2 store clerks lost their lives, and Barton was found guilty of their murder. As a result, he was sentenced to death for his crimes. Kirkham ordered a last meal of pizza and ice cream, telling the prison steward that you get cheese, meat, and everything in one meal. Now, for our subscribers pick today. What do we have here? Isn't it intriguing to witness a death row convict requesting only a fruit as his last meal before facing the execution of his death penalty? This particular man seems to not only aim to keep the doctor away, but might have hoped to keep death at bay, even if just a little bit. What makes this choice truly fascinating is that, out of all the mouth-watering, belly-loving foods he could have chosen from, he simply requested an apple. Now, we'd love to hear your thoughts on why you think he made this particular choice. What meal did you find the most surprising of them all? Feel free to drop your opinion in the comments. Number 5. Dobie Gales Williams. Dobie Gales Williams was an American criminal in Louisiana who faced conviction for the murder of Sonia Nippers in 1984. Consequently, he was sentenced to death and executed in 1999. His case has been a subject of controversy. The police claimed that he confessed, but there was no recorded evidence of this. In an interesting twist, during the incident, Dobie Gillis Williams ordered an ice cream rush and 12 chocolate bars, which became a topic of discussion surrounding the case. Number 4. Bruno Richard Hauptmann. Bruno Richard Hauptmann, a German-born carpenter, was found guilty of the kidnapping and murder of aviator Charles Lindbergh's 20-month-old son. The Lindbergh kidnapping became infamous as the crime of the century. He was executed by the state of New Jersey for this heinous crime. Before his execution, Bruno Richard Hauptmann made a specific request for his last meal. He asked for celery, olives, salmon salad, corn fritters, cheese, sliced fruit salad, dessert cake, and coffee with milk. Number 3. Saddam Hussein. In 2006, Saddam Hussein, the former president of Iraq, was executed by hanging. There has been significant controversy surrounding the details of his last meal. According to some sources, he reportedly chose mainly Western food, even enjoying a hamburger and fries before the execution. However, conflicting reports suggest that he was offered chicken and rice shawarma just before the execution, but he refused to eat it. Number 2. Alton Coleman. Alton Coleman was arrested and subsequently convicted of multiple murders and other crimes. He was sentenced to death for his crimes by lethal injection. His accomplice, Deborah Brown, was also convicted and received a prison sentence. Alton's last meal should have also been filled as a criminal offense. It started out innocent but ended with bloodshed. Fried chicken breast salad with French dressing, sweet potato pie with whipped cream, French fries, collard greens, onion rings, cornbread, broccoli with melted cheese, biscuits and gravy, and a cherry Coke. Well done, Mr. Serial Killer. Number 1. Christopher Brooks. Christopher Brooks was a convicted murderer who was executed in Alabama in 2016. He was convicted of the 1992 murder of Joe Dean Campbell, a woman he had met at a bar. Brooks, and an accomplice, who was also convicted and sentenced to death, abducted Campbell, robbed her, and then shot her multiple times before dumping her body in a remote area. Brooks was sentenced to death by lethal injection, and his execution was carried out on January 21, 2016. Brooks' last meal request was for 2 peanut butter cups and a Dr. Pepper for his last meal. He did eat that meal. What a simple man with a death wish. What do you think about all these foods? Do you think that, in some cases, these requests from the convicts are a little too much? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.